Nothing in your life turned out exactly the way you imagined, and yet you keep trying to hold on to what is already over. Today, you're going to discover who you are when everything that once felt safe starts to collapse. If nothing is permanent, then why do you still insist on living as if everything had to last forever? People change, relationships end, jobs fade, the body ages, roles transform. And in the middle of all that, there is one thing trying to be born: your true self. Most people panic when life starts taking away what is old, because they think they're losing everything. But in truth, it's in that apparent chaos that the unconscious begins to reveal the destiny that was always hidden inside. Have you noticed that before the biggest changes in your life, there were always signs, a growing discomfort, patterns that kept repeating, an intuition that insisted on speaking, losses that felt like punishment but actually made room for something greater? None of that was random. It was life preparing you for a transformation you would never have had the courage to choose alone. What you're going to see in this video is not feel-good theory. It's a precise map of what happens inside you before the biggest turning point of your story. We're going to walk together through the signs that precede great changes, the discomfort that won't shut up, the shadow that shows up, the silence that scares you, the truth you avoided, the loss that hurts but sets you free, and the courage that appears when you think it's all over. And if you stay with me until the end, you won't just understand these processes. You'll start seeing your own life differently, clearer, freer, more whole. This video is a mirror. And maybe for the first time, you'll see yourself without masks, without labels, without characters. Get ready. A lot of what you believed about stability, control, and security is going to be questioned here. It might bother you, stir up old wounds, even spark a little rebellion, but that's exactly where your freedom lives. If nothing is permanent, you're not here to cling to what shrinks you, but to answer the calls of your own soul. And today, step by step, you're going to understand why, before the biggest change of your life, certain things always happen the same way. Before any major transformation, there is always a silent movement inside the unconscious, as if life takes a step forward before you even notice. It's that discomfort that sneaks in gently, but insists on staying, pushing for change even when you try to ignore it. A person feels like something is out of place, even when on the surface everything looks the same. It's the kind of sign that someone who is awake recognizes. Destiny always calls from the inside first, and the more they try to push it away, the louder their intuition begins to pound. It's as if an invisible force were saying, "Pay attention." And when that inner wind starts to blow, there's no running from it. Life wants you to grow. This inner signal always feels strange at first because it shows up before there's any concrete evidence of change. It's like smelling rain long before the clouds appear. The person notices a peculiar silence in their own thoughts, a sense that what once fit no longer sits right. They might even think they're just confused, but in truth they're simply listening to their own soul trying to break out of old patterns. And the more they try to maintain control, the more life starts to rearrange itself at the edges, pushing them toward a path of individuation that can no longer be postponed. That's when courage is quietly invited in, even if just in small doses. A simple example, someone who has always tolerated a toxic environment, whether at work or at home, suddenly finds they can't accept it anymore. Nothing new has happened, but everything inside them has changed. They feel the shadows stirring, asking to be seen, and that deeply unsettles them. Maybe they start reading books they never would have picked up before, like The Power of Now or The Alchemist, searching for answers they didn't even know they needed. Or maybe they start jotting down feelings they've never expressed. These small actions seem insignificant, but they're clear signs that destiny is moving pieces. Change always begins like this: invisible, intimate, inevitable. It's interesting how some people try to rationalize this inner calling, as if the unconscious needed permission to guide them. They tell themselves it's just a phase, that it will pass. But deep down, they know it won't. Because what wakes up inside them isn't temporary, it's transformative. It's life explaining, without words, that the current chapter is coming to an end. And when that feeling appears, ignoring it is costly. It drains energy, peace, and time. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you grip, the faster it escapes. And it's exactly there that the biggest turning point draws near, sometimes with more intensity than the person could imagine. The most beautiful part is that this signal never shows up by accident. It appears at the exact moment you already have enough strength to change, even if you don't realize it yet. It's like a faint light at the end of a corridor, slowly guiding you out of the old and into the new. Life doesn't send this warning to those who aren't ready. It sends it when courage is already ripe, just waiting to be activated. At this point, transformation becomes inevitable, and without even knowing it, the person begins to walk toward everything that was always theirs by right. And this inner movement, if they are sensitive enough, will lead them to the next sign. When discomfort begins to grow inside someone, it isn't bad luck, chaos, or emotional mess. It's a calling. It's the unconscious rearranging the silent pieces of life, pushing the person out of the same patterns that imprisoned them for years. This discomfort is intelligent, almost strategic, and it appears exactly where transformation wants to enter. It's as if life was saying, "You no longer fit here." The body feels it, the energy shifts, intuition alerts, and no matter how much they try to convince themselves it's just exhaustion, something deeper insists. Change has arrived. Carl Jung used to say that what we avoid always returns, and it returns with interest. Discomfort is that insistent return. It's that feeling that something familiar no longer makes sense, like a relationship losing its shine or a job suddenly becoming heavier than usual. The person tries to go through the motions, but everything feels like friction, dragged out, off balance. This emotional tension isn't punishment, it's destiny, making space for individuation, separating the old from the new. And when that happens, even the silence in the house feels different, deeper, more meaningful, more demanding. A practical example: someone who has always accepted far too many tasks at work starts to feel an exhaustion that isn't physical, it's existential. Or someone who has always been the nice one in the family notices their smile is now tinged with bitterness. This discomfort reveals where they betrayed themselves. And as soon as they start noticing this, small shifts begin. Maybe they buy a book like Set Boundaries, Find Peace. Maybe they start taking solitary walks at the end of the day to listen to their own thoughts. These small actions show that courage is waking up, asking to come through. And the more they try to ignore the discomfort, the tighter it squeezes. It's like a shoe that fit for years and suddenly starts to hurt. No matter how much they try to adjust it, there's no possible fit anymore. This unease is the most honest way life has to show that the shadow is asking to be seen, that the unconscious is bringing up what has been buried for too long. There's no point in patching it up. When change wants in, it comes in through the cracks. The person feels this in their body, their thoughts, their dreams, their energy. Discomfort, once it's finally accepted, becomes the greatest ally on the journey. It didn't come to destroy, it came to reveal. It pushes you toward the path your soul already knows, even if your mind still hesitates. That's why, when the person begins to follow this calling, everything starts to reorganize with a strangely natural flow. Courage becomes less noisy, more present, and this inner movement, which once felt so uncomfortable, ends up opening doors to the next sign, the one that shows up when the shadow decides to come closer. When the shadow begins to reveal itself, no one notices it immediately. It doesn't show up banging on the door. It approaches through cracks, scattered thoughts, recurring discomforts. The person feels something rising from the depths of the unconscious, like an old mirror finally being cleaned. And even though that's scary, it's one of the clearest signs of real transformation. Jung said the shadow holds everything you had to hide to survive. When it surfaces, it's not a threat, it's a cry for attention. And that cry always comes at the exact moment when change is already ripe in the soul. It's interesting how, when the shadow appears, the person starts noticing small things that previously went unnoticed. Hidden jealousy, old anger, unresolved sadness. None of this comes out of nowhere. These are pieces of themselves knocking at the door, asking to come back home. The shadow wants to be integrated, not eliminated. And the more they accept looking at these parts, the more their intuition grows stronger, as if saying, "This is what you needed to see." Individuation begins like this, bringing light to what was forgotten for too long. And there is no more honest destiny than that reunion. A practical example. Someone who has always been extremely hard on themselves may realize that this rigidity was born from a primitive fear of rejection. Or someone who constantly gives too much may discover that deep down, they're terrified of being abandoned. The shadow exposes the wound behind the behavior. And once the person sees that, they can start acting differently. Maybe begin therapy, maybe start an emotional journal, maybe read something like Women Who Run with the Wolves or Man and His Symbols. Small moves that reveal growing courage. The courage to truly see oneself. Integrating the shadow, though, is not comfortable. At times, the person feels like they're opening a drawer full of things they've avoided for years. But that's exactly where true change happens. The inner silence starts to gain more depth, more space, more truth. They realize they're not fighting an enemy, but talking to a part of themselves that has been drifting for too long. Old patterns become obvious, almost loud, revealing where they betrayed themselves, where they left their essence behind. It hurts, but it heals. And when this shadow reveals itself clearly, something magical happens. The person begins to regain power. They realize that what they avoided for so long was exactly what they needed to integrate in order to grow. Suddenly, the courage that seemed small becomes stable. The transformation gains grounding, direction, meaning. This reconciliation with themselves opens the way for the next quiet signal from the soul. That moment when life, before changing everything on the outside, creates a deep pause on the inside. There is a kind of silence that doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. It's that strange moment when a person feels that something is about to happen, even though nothing concrete has changed around them. This silence is almost spiritual, as if the unconscious were holding its breath before handing over the next piece of the transformation. It's not peace, but a deep, dense pause full of meaning. Intuition becomes sharper, clearer, harder to ignore, and without realizing it, they start walking differently, thinking differently, feeling differently. It's the prelude to the change that's on its way. In this silence, old certainties start to crumble like sandcastles, and the person notices they can no longer cling to their previous versions of themselves. It's like walking into a room where all the lights have been turned off, yet still sensing that there's something new inside. The unconscious works intensely in these moments, reorganizing patterns, dismantling masks, repositioning the soul for the next leap. And this emptiness, so uncomfortable for someone used to controlling everything, is actually the exact space needed for the new to come in. Individuation always needs room to grow. A practical example of this is when someone suddenly loses interest in things that used to be essential, old friendships, daily habits, even ambitions that once seemed crucial. It's not apathy, it's transition. It's as if destiny were clearing the land before building something greater. The person may feel drawn to solitude, to walking alone, to spending more time with their own thoughts. Maybe they start listening to more introspective music. Maybe they begin writing small reflections. Maybe they try guided meditations on YouTube. It's the soul preparing the field. This inner silence often comes with an emotional emptiness that's hard to explain. Suddenly, the person no longer fights for what they used to fight for, no longer argues for the same reasons, no longer insists on what once felt urgent. They feel as if something has switched off, but in reality, something is rebooting. It's a necessary pause so that courage can be rearranged. It's life turning down the excess noise so they can finally hear their inner voice. And it's at this exact point that the shadow, already exposed, grows quieter, making way for reconstruction. This silence is always a sign that change is closer than ever. It's the moment when the soul clears the distractions out of the way so the person can finally see what really matters. They may think they're stuck, but they're actually in destiny's waiting room. And while everything seems still, transformation is gaining underground strength, preparing the next movement. The internal shift that comes as a persistent whisper, reminding them there's no going back. There comes a point in life when intuition stops being just a whisper and turns into a daily, insistent, almost stubborn presence. A person feels as if something inside them is pushing, guiding, pointing in directions the mind can't yet understand. That call doesn't come from logic. It comes from the unconscious, which always sees ahead. It's a kind of emotional compass that activates during periods of deep change, steering the soul toward what needs to happen. And the more they try to ignore it, the stronger the signal becomes. Intuition doesn't give up. Intuition shows up in the details. A discomfort that appears out of nowhere, a sudden urge to say no that never existed before, a random impulse to change something seemingly minor. And it's precisely in that simplicity that its power lies. It arrives before transformation, clearing the path so courage can step in. The person might think they're getting too sensitive, but it's exactly the opposite. They're becoming more conscious, more awake. Individuation always begins like this, noticing what used to slip by. It's like putting on glasses after years of blurry vision. A real example. Someone who has always ignored the discomfort in a relationship might suddenly wake up with a clear feeling that they need to talk about what they're feeling. Or someone who always dreamed of changing careers but never found the courage feels an inner push to research courses, open job sites, look at new possibilities. Intuition nudges. It might even suggest small actions, making a list of priorities, starting books like Emotional Intelligence or Awaken the Giant Within, or simply choosing to walk in silence for 15 minutes to listen to their own body. Small gestures that change everything. The most striking thing about intuition is that it doesn't give explanations. It gives directions. It points before you understand. And that's unsettling for someone who has always lived trapped in rational patterns, trying to control everything. The person realizes that something inside them knows more than they do. They feel a pull, butterflies in their stomach, a strange certainty about what needs to be done, even when it doesn't make sense. It's destiny carving an invisible trail through the chaos. And the shadow, now less threatening, begins to cooperate. When intuition insists, it's because the change has already begun on the inside. It becomes a quiet yet firm guide, bringing clarity into the fog. The person realizes that this movement doesn't come from outside, but from the deepest point of their awareness. And the more they listen, the more life rearranges itself around them, as if it were conspiring in their favor. Courage grows. The impulse to move forward gets stronger, and this inner awakening opens the way to another inevitable process, that moment when the old self starts to let go. There is a moment on the journey when a person realizes they simply can't be who they used to be anymore. Not because something forced them, but because the old self just doesn't fit inside them anymore. It's like clothing that shrank or skin that's become too tight. The transformation that has been growing inside starts demanding space on the outside. And the unconscious, which has been working quietly, reveals the inevitable. To move forward, something must be left behind, not out of weakness, but out of maturity. This letting go is the signature of true change. What's most interesting is that this process doesn't happen all at once. It comes in layers, like leaves falling from a tree at the end of autumn. The person starts noticing that old habits no longer make sense. Conversations feel empty. Certain environments drain their energy. They try to cling to their old patterns, but can tell their soul has already left those places. Intuition starts pulling them toward new spaces, new choices, new possibilities. And even if fear shows up, courage shows up too. And it shows up bigger. A practical example, someone who has always lived to please others suddenly feels exhausted. The mask slips. The shadow shows the cost of all that self-betrayal. And even though it's uncomfortable, the person starts saying no, even if their voice shakes. Or someone who has always accepted less than they deserve in relationships begins to feel an inner strength demanding dignity. Maybe they read The Gifts of Imperfection. Maybe they start jotting down all they've tolerated out of fear. Each gesture is a thread breaking away from the old self, and that, in itself, is already transformation. This letting go also happens in inner choices, the ones no one sees. The person decides to stop punishing themselves, stop comparing their life to others, stop repeating stories that no longer serve them. It's like clearing out their own mind, removing heavy furniture that was only collecting dust. The inner silence becomes clearer, lighter, almost luminous, and for the first time in a long while, they feel they don't have to carry everything on their back. That sense of relief is the first sign that individuation is moving forward. Destiny is opening a crack. Then comes the moment when the old self really begins to die, not with pain, but with liberation. The person looks back and realizes there's no way to return to who they were. The bridge has been crossed, the shadow has been integrated, courage has been summoned. And this letting go, which seemed so terrifying at the start, becomes the key to change. It's a quiet rebirth, a powerful invitation to the next stage of this inner journey, the moment when old patterns finally begin to dissolve. When something starts happening over and over in someone's life, it's never by chance. It's a calling. Repetition is the most persistent way the unconscious tries to teach what the mind insists on ignoring. Situations that look different but carry the same essence begin to appear with almost irritating frequency. It's life saying, "You should have learned this by now." These recurring patterns are like mirrors placed strategically on the path, revealing where the transformation needs to happen. A person might try to convince themselves it's just bad luck, but their intuition knows better. Repetition has a very clear function: to expose blind spots. When the same dynamic shows up in relationships, work, family, it's because the shadow is asking for attention, and that time is now. It's uncomfortable to admit that some pains repeat because they haven't been healed, but that's the first step of individuation. Life doesn't repeat what's complete. It only repeats what's still wounded. And interestingly, the more the person runs away from it, the stronger the repetition becomes. Destiny is patient, but insistent. A practical example: someone who keeps changing jobs, but always ends up with controlling bosses. Or someone who switches relationships, but without realizing it, keeps connecting with emotionally unavailable people. They think, "This again?" But the truth is, the problem isn't in the setting, it's in the wound that hasn't been seen yet. And once the person realizes that, they can finally start making different choices, reading books like The Gifts of Imperfection, going to therapy focused on repetitive patterns, or even writing unsent letters to better understand their emotions. Repetition exists to set you free. Repetition also reveals where someone abandons themselves. They notice they always react the same way, staying quiet when they should speak up, accepting the minimum when they deserve the maximum, shrinking themselves to fit into spaces that can no longer hold their real size. These automatic gestures, so small, so unconscious, form the core of repeated patterns. And when they finally see that, they feel a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the time lost, relief for the power regained. Courage begins to grow precisely from that awareness. It's at this point that repetition stops being punishment and becomes a portal. As soon as the person answers what life has been asking, the pattern dissolves like smoke. Change enters, the soul breathes. The unconscious hands over the next key on the journey. The person feels as if something has unlocked inside them, opening space for a new destiny. And as this understanding ripens, life starts preparing the next move, that inevitable encounter with the truth they've been avoiding for so long. There comes a moment when life stops whispering and starts speaking loudly. It's when a person finally comes face to face with the truth they've avoided for years. It's not that they didn't know. It's that facing it requires a courage they didn't have before. That truth can be simple or devastating, but it's always liberating. It's like turning on the light in a room you knew was messy, but preferred to keep the door shut. The unconscious always knew. The shadow always held it. And when that encounter happens, transformation speeds up. This ignored truth is usually the one that bothers the most because it tears down excuses, breaks masks, and exposes patterns that have been repeating for years. The person realizes it wasn't the world holding them back. It was themselves. The inner silence grows denser, deeper, as if the soul were finally breathing after being trapped for too long. Intuition had warned them many times before, but now there is no way to deny it. It's the beginning of real change, the kind that doesn't reverse. Destiny has been waiting for exactly this moment to move forward. A practical example, someone who has always complained about loneliness but realizes they never actually learned how to open up. Or someone who has always blamed their job for their unhappiness but discovers that fear of taking risks was the real prison. Truth is always simple, and that's why it's so scary. When the person finally admits it, they can take concrete steps. Starting therapy focused on self-knowledge, taking courses they've always postponed, or even changing daily routines that reinforce their stagnation. Truth hurts, but it heals, and it heals fast. What's most striking is that once this truth surfaces, everything begins to rearrange itself with almost symbolic speed. What once felt confusing starts to align. What seemed impossible draws closer. What felt distant gains shape. The shadow loses its power because it has been seen. The unconscious relaxes because it has been heard. And the person feels a strange lightness, as if they were more authentic, more whole, more in charge of themselves. At this point, individuation becomes tangible. Life changes inside first, then outside. This meeting with an ignored truth is the portal that separates the old from the new. After that, the person can no longer pretend they don't know. Courage grows without asking for permission, and destiny opens up a path only they can walk. This inner revelation pushes the soul into a new space, a clean, pure, possible space. And it's right here, when everything seems to be falling into place, that something unexpected happens. Life takes something important away to make room for what comes next. Every great transformation goes through a moment when something is removed from a person's life, and almost always they think they're losing. But the truth is more subtle. It's not loss, it's space. The unconscious knows when something no longer supports the path, and then life rearranges the pieces, sometimes abruptly. A relationship ends, a job is lost, a friendship drifts away. It looks like chaos, but it's disguised order. It's destiny saying this was taking the place of what truly belongs to you. The silence that follows that loss is the beginning of change. The person feels a strange emptiness, as if something has been ripped away, and it has. But it was something that no longer belonged to their individuation. The pain is real, of course. The shadow tries to convince them that everything is unfair, cruel, sudden, but just a bit of intuition is enough to see that this ending had been announced long ago. Life just did on the outside what they didn't have the courage to do on the inside. Loss becomes a bridge, and as hard as it is to accept at first, this is one of the most powerful signs of deep transformation. A clear example, someone who is fired from a job they hate, but insisted on keeping out of fear. At first, panic sets in, but soon after comes the chance to finally follow a calling that had been suffocated. Or someone who leaves a relationship that drained their energy and weeks later starts to recover their identity. Loss opens doors. It pushes the soul toward what truly makes sense, and for someone feeling that cut, small actions help. Reading The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, taking clarity walks, writing down what they want to build from that point onward. Emptiness is fertile. What's even more interesting is that when something leaves, life doesn't take long to show signs that it was necessary. The person starts feeling lighter, more honest with themselves, more aware of the patterns they had tolerated. The shadow stops being a threat and becomes an ally. It clearly shows where the excess, the illusions, the fears were. The unconscious sighs in relief. The inner silence, once painful, becomes spacious and bright. It's like opening a window in a stuffy room. Change finds its way in. But the deepest realization is seeing that this loss wasn't random. It was destiny. It was a precise, almost surgical intervention so the person could be reborn whole. When they understand that, courage appears, not as an explosive force, but as stability. They feel there is something greater guiding this journey. And at this point, they're already ready for the next inevitable step of this path. That moment when, without warning, a force appears inside them that can't be explained, only felt. At some point on the journey, after so much silent transformation, something unexpected happens. Courage simply shows up. It's not a firework, it's more like a steady flame that begins to burn inside. The person looks at their life and, for the first time, feels they can do what once seemed impossible. The unconscious, which had been preparing this moment for a long time, releases a strength that can't be explained logically. They just feel they can't postpone the change anymore. Intuition, the shadow, the patterns, everything seems aligned for this step. It's destiny opening the door. This courage doesn't show up on perfect days, but precisely when everything feels confusing. It appears in the middle of chaos, in the middle of fear, in the middle of doubt. It's as if, within the inner silence, a voice calmly says, "Now." The person doesn't stop feeling afraid, but realizes that courage is bigger. The shadow doesn't disappear, but it settles down. Old patterns still try to pull them back, but no longer have the same power. It's at this exact point that change stops being an idea and becomes a concrete action. A clear example: someone who has delayed ending a toxic relationship for years suddenly has a definitive conversation. Their voice doesn't shake as much as before. Or someone who has always dreamed of starting a business finally schedules a meeting with a partner, opens a company, starts small, but starts. Courage shows up in practical gestures, sending that email, making that call, saying that enough. And if they want to strengthen it, they can seek out stories of people who've gone through major turning points, read biographies, watch movies that feed this inner strength archetype, actions that nourish the soul. The most beautiful part is that this courage doesn't come alone. It's accompanied by a sense of alignment, as if finally their inner and outer life were on the same page. The person feels they are honoring their individuation, respecting who they truly are. Inner silence is no longer empty, it's presence. The unconscious stops acting only backstage and becomes a visible ally in their choices. They realize they don't need to be perfect to move forward. They need to be honest, and that honesty becomes fuel. And when this courage settles in, something changes forever. Deep down, the person knows they can't go back to who they were. The transformation becomes irreversible. Destiny, once feared, becomes something they actively seek. The shadow stops being a prison and turns into a source of power. And that whole sequence of signs, the discomfort, the repetition, the losses, the truth, reveals itself as a perfect script, leading precisely to this moment. What comes after this is no longer just change. It's a new life being built, step by step, choice by choice. You can see now that nothing that happened to you was random. That insistent discomfort, the situations that kept repeating, the losses that felt unfair, the truth you avoided for so long, and this quiet courage that began to rise, all of it was part of a single movement. Life, trying to return you to yourself. The question now is no longer, why did this happen to me, but what am I going to do with everything I already know about myself? From here on out, every time a pattern repeats, instead of blaming yourself, you can ask, what is this situation trying to teach me? When discomfort knocks, instead of running, you can look at it as a mentor, not an enemy. When you feel like you're losing something, you can remember, maybe it's not a loss. Maybe it's space being made for something more aligned with who you are today. And this isn't motivational talk, it's daily practice in awareness. So what are you going to do with this new level of clarity? Are you going to keep betraying yourself to fit into tight spaces? Or are you going to honor the transformation that has already started inside you? Which relationships, habits, routines, or thoughts do you know no longer match your destiny, but you still hold on to out of fear? And deeper still, which version of you finally needs to die so that your life can truly begin? If this video stirred something in you, don't ignore it. Save it, rewatch it, take notes, share it with someone going through a major change and feeling lost. Use this content as a map. Come back to it on days when courage feels small and fear feels big. And if you want to keep going deeper into this journey of self-knowledge, transformation, and individuation, you already know what the next step is. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stick around. With each new video, you'll understand a bit more about your own unconscious, your shadow, your patterns, and your destiny. It's not about learning pretty concepts. It's about becoming the person you've always felt, deep down, you could be. The journey doesn't end here, it's just getting started.